Welcome back, everyone. The singing group is now in place. We were just reorganising the furniture to make it a bit cosier and to deflect some of the difficult questions that may come back. But I'm glad you all come back. You were a bit reluctant to leave for coffee in the first place, so I was a bit worried that I'd got the wrong announcement, that there was no coffee, and you were just happy to sit there and chat. So welcome back. Welcome to the panel discussion session. It's going to last about an hour. And, having planned this session over the last few weeks, and I met my fantastic colleagues here a couple of times, and we did a bit of role-playing and what we think we could have put forward that was going to be as helpful for you as possible. So I'm quite excited about introducing this session over the next hour. We're going to be reflecting on 6 key themes. We thought we might have a dropout because Tejesh was involved in some criminal justice activity. He was a juror. He was on jury service, but they let him off for today. So we're back up to 6 panellists, and we've got 6 key themes that we're going to explore together. And just that theme of reflecting on the last 7 years and what has it been like for you, for us, and particularly during the last few years of the pandemic. So I'm delighted to introduce our colleagues, the panellists today, and you'll be able to see their organisations' bios on the digital version of the programme. No hard copies today, but you'll be able to find their organisations' bios there. What's going to happen, all the members of the panel, each in turn, are going to introduce and give a very brief overview of their chosen theme. And a couple of other panellists, without any fuss and without any invitation from me, might come in with some supplementary observations or comments in addition to the main panellist who's going to talk on each theme. And that will maybe take up about half an hour, before, most importantly, we want to open the floor up for about 20 minutes worth of good discussion. And then the panel, in turn, will again just give a final thought, maybe even an aspiration about the way forward for today's discussion. So, colleagues, please welcome, first of all, Rhona Matheson. Rhona is the Chief Exec. You can give a big round of applause at the collective end. Oh no, do it now, yeah. That'll make Rhona feel quite relaxed. We're all a bit nervous here actually, so please give us some warm smiles and feedback, encouragement. But Rhona is Chief Exec of Starcatchers, which is Scotland's arts and early years organisation that creates performances and creative activities for babies and young children. And I need to learn more about that because I'm now doing some granddaddy daycare, I think is Mhairi how she described it, on a Friday afternoon. So I'll be speaking to you later about that, Rhona. Rhona's going to kick things off in a couple of minutes by expanding on the need, and I know I'm saying this carefully, the need to celebrate what the sector has achieved over the last 7 years. And I know that is cushioned by lots of other problems, challenges, pressures. But Rhona is going to try and help us, all of us, to collectively celebrate how things have been for the sector, for us being funded by the fund. Tejesh, please welcome Tejesh Mistry. You can welcome him. That was a bit, yeah. We had to do a bit of encouraging there, Tejesh. So Tejesh is Director of External Affairs at the Venture Trust, whom I know very well indeed from my previous work in Youth Scotland. And Venture Trust support people who have been struggling with their involvement in the criminal justice system or long-term unemployment or indeed their mental health and well-being. And no surprise that Tejesh is going to introduce and reflect on the health and well-being of the sector at this point in the pandemic journey. And on my immediate right, we've got Joe Jarvis. Please welcome Joe to the stage. Thank you. Joe's the Strategic Manager at Glasgow's ESOL Forum, and that's the organisation that introduces English for speakers of other languages. And Joe is going to speak about the role of and the diversity in volunteering in the sector today. And now moving to my left, we've got Lara Wierzoch. Please welcome Lara. Thank you, Lara, welcome. And Lara is a social worker with Birthlink, which is a fascinating but small Scottish charity offering support and advice to adopted adults, birth parents, adoptive parents, birth families, and other professionals worldwide. Some fascinating work if you look at their website there. And Lara is going to introduce the importance of hearing the voice of and the engagement with our members, our users, our clients, people who engage with our services through the sector. And then next to Lara is Dinah. Please welcome Dinah Aitken. Thank you. Dinah is the head of outreach at Salvesen Mindroom Centre, a Scottish charity that supports and informs and empowers children and young people living with learning difficulties. And Dinah is going to build on what Lara is speaking about by introducing a rights-based approach to the work of the sector and the role of the UNCRC for organisations engaged with children and young people. And then last but no means least is Barry Crawford, who I've known for some time in the youth work space. Barry, please welcome Barry. Barry is Chief Exec at LGBTI Youth Scotland and supports Scotland's national charity that supports young people, LGBTI young people across Scotland. And Barry is going to wrap things up with an easy subject, and that's by introducing, surprise, surprise, something about core funding of the sector. So there'll be no difficult questions for Barry, I'm sure. But we thank all of the panellists for their time, for their preparations before today. Colleagues, please relax. They seem a friendly bunch. Relax and let's just have the conversation that we've been having on Zoom over the last couple of weeks, and we'll get through this session. I'll keep an eye on the time, and we've got until about 11:30, hopefully then open up to the floor. But first up, Rhona.
No mean feat. Hi everyone, it is lovely to be here, and I suppose when I was reflecting on the conversation that we were going to have this morning, and sort of you come to conferences, and certainly if I think back 7 years, you would go to conferences and you would always say, oh, it's fantastic to be here, but I think in the last couple of years the idea of actually being in a room with colleagues has had quite a different tone. So it really is fantastic to be here. And just to pick up on kind of some of the conversation around celebration that both Iain and the Minister sort of touched on earlier this morning, when we were discussing the content of this session, the idea about, how do we as a sector celebrate what we've done over the last couple of years? And it feels a bit awkward to be having that conversation because we've bounced from one crisis into another, but we didn't get a chance kind of post that, once things opened up again, to actually really reflect and celebrate what we achieved as a sector for children, young people, families, communities, adult learners across the country, because the third sector was the sector that was able to really step up. We were able to be flexible and agile and respond to the needs of really vulnerable people across the country at a time when lots of other services weren't able to work in such a flexible way. And so, I'm conscious of the work that my team did. At that time, my colleague Heather is here, and she was instrumental in some of the work that we delivered during COVID, and how adamant some of my colleagues were about how we retained connection with already isolated, vulnerable young parents and their children who lived in really, they live in very difficult, challenging circumstances. So the idea that we would not retain any connection, we wouldn't find ways of supporting them through, particularly that first lockdown when everything was so uncertain and really quite scary. The idea that we wouldn't do anything was incomprehensible, really, to them. So we're an arts-based organisation, so inevitably we used a creative approach to figure out how we find ways to retain our connection with families. Creative play packs that were landed on people's doorsteps, online supportive sessions for parents, finding other funding and other support services that families could turn to when we couldn't respond to the needs that they had, doorstep performances, all sorts of different types of activities that provided invaluable support to people who were incredibly isolated at that time. Manipulating the guidelines so that we could actually meet face-to-face safely was one of the key things that we did. So I'm incredibly proud of what we did, but we've never had a real chance to kind of sit back and reflect and pat ourselves on the back for that. So I know it's really difficult to do that when we're navigating this other crisis, which at the moment feels even more uncertain and at times more difficult than COVID. But I think we do need to take a moment to just reflect and acknowledge that we've achieved a huge amount.
Thank you very much. Rhona, thank you. Jo, would you like to maybe add a comment or two?
Yeah, I would just add to that we all did achieve an incredible amount of work, and I think that happened because, well, in my organisation we're a really tight team, and I think people trust each other, we've got good relationships, and that's been built over the time that we've had working together and doing interesting projects before the pandemic. So people wanted to work together, and that's because they wanted to spend time with each other where we're helping each other get through it. And I think it's valuing the work that we do, but also valuing the people that are doing the work, and really acknowledging that this uncertain time is really difficult for them as well, but just to keep how we keep our team, our staff spirits up, whether that's a team of volunteers or team of staff or sessional staff, maybe really low paid staff, how we keep people positive and feeling good about the work they do, because we do tend to run on motivation and celebrating our good work and not necessarily money. So, yeah, that's what I want to say.
Good. So we're really keen to hear your views and your thoughts about, can we celebrate at a time of crisis, a time of pressure? So please jot down your thoughts, your questions or observations that you may have, and we'll pick those up at the end. But first of all, and it fits nicely into the first comments from Rhona, is Tejesh is going to introduce the topic of health and well-being of the sector.
Thanks, Iain. I think building on that, the thing that I reflected on around this is that we're very proud, I think, as a sector and proud as individuals in terms of what we feel we can achieve. And it triggered a kind of memory from some training a long time ago where I was introduced to this concept of the BHAG. I don't know if people have come across this, the big, hairy, audacious goal, where you have this kind of vision of something that seems impossible, that seems that's something that's unattainable, but you are uncompromising in your ability to drive towards that. And for me, that's how I describe the last few years, that we took that momentum as a sector, we drove towards that goal of supporting our beneficiaries the best that we could within a challenging environment, and we achieved a hell of a lot through that. And there's a lot of links to well-being, and I think some of those have already been touched upon as part of this conversation. And part of that for me was the kind of momentum we gained through that time, and the building of what I would call kind of partnership capital, whether with funders, whether with other organisations, whether with other sectors through that period. And a lot of that has been very powerful. There was a building of trust. There was a lot of flexibility that had been introduced in the ways that we work, the introduction of technology as well as part of that. And I think the challenge for well-being is that we're at a point where there's a risk we're moving back to what normal was. Everyone talked about the new normal, and I think what we actually are seeing is a risk of that returning to normal as it was before. And I think the impact on the sector's well-being as part of that is something that we need to be quite aware of. I was defining well-being, and I think the important bit for me within that was thinking about three layers of well-being for our sector. One as individuals, and I think we've talked a bit about that today. It has been a challenging time for us as leaders, as individuals, as parents, through this period of time. And it is important to reflect on that and to think about that, I think. We've also seen people realign their priorities as part of that, and that's a reality, I think, of where we are. As organisations, as third sector organisations, it has been a challenging time. There's real momentum, I think, we see today around collaboration and wanting to work together. I've had conversations already this morning around people wanting to continue partnerships and develop those partnerships. And then as a wider community, so how we work together to address some of the kind of bigger challenges across sectors, I think that is going to be important for us and our well-being. The final bit that in the definition that I came across was looking at sort of how sustainable is that for the future, thinking about our well-being and those kind of wider environmental factors. We know cost of living, inflation, all those things are going to be there, but we need to think about what we can do to address that. Just thinking about our people, I was introduced to the EAP recently. EAP is another thing I haven't come across, but employee assistance programs. And I think it is healthy for us to see there's a range of apps, organisations, and I'd encourage you, if you haven't already, charities to think about what they're doing actively to support both formally and informally their staff teams. And I finally just wanted to leave you with a quote that I came across from a chief exec within the sector, Andy Ratcliffe. And for me, it brought to life what I think we as a sector are like, our characteristics, if you like. And that is that I've seen too many leaders in the social sector treat themselves terribly because they're so driven by wanting to achieve positive change.
So important points there from Tejesh. Thank you so much. I just wonder if Mhairi might have a comment to add to that.
It's a nice one to follow. Personally, I love the idea of a BHAG, and I want to go away and figure out what our BHAG is. Because, a big, hairy, ambitious goal is a good way to describe it. I think just reflecting on that, something I've seen right across the sector is how the staff within all the organisations actually pull together so strongly to support those massive numbers of young people that the Minister was talking about earlier. And actually at times we pushed and we pushed and we pushed. And you touched on it, there's a real risk, and we're chatting about it just in front of the stage before we started, but actually the risk of burnout, and I hate to use that word, but the risk of just fatigue for the sector, for all of the staff and all of the volunteers who we can't function without, because we've gone from one crisis into the next. And the importance of self-care as leaders and modelling that good behaviour and the good principles and practice to then ensure that our staff and our volunteers are in a position that they can keep supporting themselves so that we can keep engaging with and supporting the young people that we do. Young people and adults. I'm a young person charity, so I forget about the adults sometimes, sorry. I think that's a really, really important point to reflect on. And things like employee assistance programmes or the weird and wonderful measures we put in during lockdowns that actually really helped our staff. Actually, what can we then do constructively to maintain this now as we are going through cost of living crisis? I'm going to have to touch on the school strikes because I was off yesterday, looking after my wee one. But all of that, it's how do we then make sure our staff are supported? And I think that's maybe something to reflect on in the discussion later.
So it'd be great to hear your thoughts, your views on health of the sector, well-being of you, the leaders, your staff, the volunteers that work with you. It'd be good to hear your views on that later on. But in the meantime, Joe's going to lead off in a bit of a discussion on volunteering, the role of volunteers, different kinds of volunteers we have in the sector, and the diversity of volunteering. Joe.
Hi, I'm Jo Jarvis from Glasgow ESOL Forum, and I'm just here to remind you about the adults, Mhairi.
Well, there's a fight breaking out.
No. So I work with adults who are learning English, and we work with a lot of volunteers who help us with our service delivery. There's a lot of volunteers involved in service delivery in adult education, partially because there's probably not the funding to support people to meet the great needs that adults have and complicated needs. So I'm going to talk about volunteers from quite a specific point of view, but I suppose, for me, investing in volunteers and thinking about what motivates them and what supports them is also a nod to the workforce development of our sector and how important it is to do that. I myself started as a volunteer, as I'm sure many other adult educators did. So I suppose volunteers want to support the adults we work with to learn English because they want to welcome people to Scotland, they want to support their communities, they want to use skills they've already got, or they might be trying to learn new skills. And during the pandemic we had a bit of a cautious response and then a great response from volunteers, I think because people felt really needed. It gave them a meaningful structure to their weeks as well as obviously being able to help learners, so it's a really supportive thing. Since after the pandemic, I think we've struggled a bit with volunteers, and I think, as Rhona says, it's going into this new crisis of cost of living, and really, can people afford to volunteer anymore? That's one of our challenges. At the time that the fund started, it was just around the start of the Syrian war, and people were really moved to support refugees and wanted to welcome people, and since that time there's been refugees moved to new areas of Scotland. We've welcomed Afghanis, we've welcomed Ukrainians, but also now there's different areas that are becoming dispersal areas, so asylum seekers are now living there as well. So the need for ESOL is increasing all over the country, and without ESOL, people can't get on with their lives, so it's really, really important to us, and volunteers luckily want to help with that. However, volunteers are not free. They're really not. They need to be supported, especially when they're doing something as specialised as service delivery, and that's kind of where we came into this fund thinking, okay, volunteers need to be supported. So do the people supporting the volunteers, do they have any support? And we've created a network of volunteer coordinators around the country that can ask each other questions when they don't know it. Everybody's working on a shoestring, so I can contact somebody in Skye and say, how did you do this? We've got a really small group of this, or they can do the same with me, and it's been a really, really positive thing. So we've got a network that's mostly been delivered online now. We had the first few meetings in person, but now it's mostly online. And we've also developed a framework of good practice, thinking about volunteer roles, how you support them, how you train them, how you provide them ongoing training. So I suppose the other thing that's been important to me throughout this is thinking about the diversity of volunteers as well. We've got a Volunteering for All action plan from the Scottish Government. And for me, it was about how do I get volunteers coming to our organisation that reflect the communities we work with. And it's always like thinking, I think all of us do it, it's like, who aren't we working with? Who else can we reach out to? And this was a group that I really wanted to reach out to. So we've started delivering an introduction to teaching ESOL. It's an SQA qualification, and it's brilliant. Of our current cohort, over 50% of them are asylum seekers, some from teaching backgrounds and some not. And it's brilliant to think that those people are being welcomed into the workforce, albeit a very precarious, underpaid workforce with, people are becoming volunteers, and it might lead to employment. So in preparation for this, yesterday I spoke to one of our volunteers who are on that course, and he was an English teacher in Syria, but mostly for children and young people, not adults. So he's doing the course with us, and he's just the way he talks about teaching, he said, it's not a career, it's my life, it's his vocation. Like, he completely came alive talking about it. I think he used the word amazing about 40 times in the conversation. But I asked him why he thought it was important to get different people, and he said it's like a garden. You need variety. It's beautiful. We have beautiful thoughts, different cultures, and everybody coming together and learning for each other. And his point was as well, it's like going through the asylum system is really difficult, but if the teachers that are working with you understand that, then it just makes that whole process a bit more positive. And for that, we would need to look after him as a volunteer to do that. And it's just that constantly valuing the work that people who give us their time are doing and supporting it. And I know I've talked about this from quite an adult education point of view, and different volunteers will be across different for children, young people, volunteers will do different things, but I think it's that crucial thing of like supporting them and looking after them.
Thank you very much. Joe, thank you. We're just going to move on and introduce Lara, and Lara's going to speak a bit more about the voice of and engagement with our users, clients, members, young people, adults in our work. Lara.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, so kind of reflecting on kind of a lot of what has been talked about, and I mean, well, we wouldn't be here without our service users, and representing the adults as well on this panel. But they do exist. But yeah, just kind of, I've been reflecting, thinking about the theme of the 7 years, and then thinking about how much has changed in COVID. The organisation I work for, Birthlink, so we support adults affected by adoption with a Scottish connection. So you have to be born or adopted here, but you could live anywhere in the world. So in a strange way, we were in a bit of a unique position where we already had a lot of kind of online communication, phone conversations. Our skill base really is in that. So from that side of things didn't shift as drastically as perhaps for other people when you're working in the community, in the community, when our community is so much larger. Well, smaller, but widespread. So, it was this interesting kind of thinking about what has kind of changed, if anything. And I think certainly there has been a cultural shift in that people do now feel that they can access services more easily, perhaps, given that people are much more au fait with being online and accessing things that way, which has certainly been positive for ourselves. But what has also changed with that is kind of our collaboration with partners. That's been really important for us to kind of advocate on behalf of our service users, to be able to then be in touch with each other on a wider scale. We host a forum for all the voluntary sectors and local authorities who are in the after adoption sphere in Scotland, and it was always the case you would invite Orkney and Shetland, but they would never be able to turn up. And now it's brilliant. We've actually had a lot of engagement from kind of, the Highlands and Islands, which has just been fantastic. And it's just that sense of bringing, I guess, the community a bit closer to home, which has been really helpful. But what certainly, I'm sorry, this public speaking nonsense, I'm not used to it, Ian.
It's nerve-wracking.
But what kind of has changed a bit in our engagement. So we primarily work with kind of the adoptions of the past, so the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and working towards kind of current adoptions as well. But what has kind of changed for us in recent times has been the highlighting of the forced adoption movements that have been going through Parliament and government, the conversations that have been being had about the voices of birth mothers, birth parents, adult adoptees who's unfortunately have been silenced for decades, and hearing that be discussed on such a public forum nationally within Scotland, but also the UK, reflecting on kind of the previous work that's been done in Australia as well. It's maybe a bit of a breath of life into work where, unfortunately, we're seeing that a lot of our birth parents are passing away. But that kind of brings forth new people that we're working with, a lot of siblings, which obviously is a huge focus of the promise and keeping those relationships. So we are shifting, but we're giving a voice to those people who didn't have it or were forced to suppress it at a time. So that's certainly something that I think is shifting, and what I'm hoping with the funding that may or may not be coming will hopefully be something that we can continue to support and work on behalf of our service users, and that's been part of our history for the last 111 years. We just turned 111 last year, so it is something that we're wanting to continue. But I hope that it does kind of lead to something that is not just lip service, and that it does become realistic, in practice for everyone. So.
Thank you, Lara, for those wonderful insights into your work. Thank you. And I think just in the last segment of this little piece, about volunteering, about voice, is rights and rights-based approach. And Dinah is just going to lead into a few minutes observation on her thoughts on that.
Yeah,
Dinah.
thank you. Well, I find Scotland a great place to work in terms of policy and legislation. To adopt a rights-based approach, I think, right across the sector, that's second nature to us, and we're not even pushing at an open door. These rights are enshrined in law. We're all signed up to the UNCRC. I know the bill is struggling to get passed because of some technical amendments that are needed, but I don't think across the third sector we really need the bill, because we all work within the framework of the UNCRC and a rights-based approach. Anyway, we've got care standards, we've got the promise, so we're all already there. So it's a really, really nice environment to work in. And we undertook in our organisation, where we support neurodivergent children and young people and their families, we kind of mapped our work onto the UNCRC and the promise and the UNCRPD as well. And that was a really nice piece of work to do, and a nice way to reflect that actually this is a natural and instinctive way to work in this sector. But at the same time, for lots of us here and right across the sector, the only reason we exist is because there's so many people who are still falling through the gaps. And there's an accountability gap, there's an implementation gap. I could mention, for example, education. Of course, our young people in Scotland have a right to a free education. It is supposed to be directed towards the fulfilment of their individual potential as far as their mental and physical capabilities will allow, but many young people experience an education that falls far short of that, and these are the people that we're all supporting, and supporting their families as well. So I suppose, I'm keeping it brief, but I could say, looking back over the past 7 years, and even before that, lots and lots to celebrate about Scotland being a rights-based culture, having really taken the UNCRC to heart. But we can't be complacent. There is so much more to do. I think for us across the sector, it's very important. Lara was talking about voice. It's important that we collectively raise the voice of all the people who are facing inequality and are not accessing these rights that are really well articulated at a high level, but we need to do more to make sure that that translates down to the individuals.
Thank you so much, Dinah. Thank you. That ends on a nice little segment on volunteering, on the voice of and engagement with our users, and then introducing a rather positive take on UNCRC in Scotland and a rights-based approach. Please think about your questions and any observations you may want to make, as we'll come on to that in 2 or 3 minutes' time. But before we finish the panel discussions, I'm going to introduce Mhairi to introduce the wonderful topic of income generation and core funding in particular.
What a topic. I can safely say don't not attend one of the meetings, because then you get given topic. No, funding is something I suppose very, very close to all of our hearts. And when we were initially discussing how this panel might run and the topics that we might be interested in, we were reflecting on actually, even within this one fund, the variety of programmes and needs that this funding needs to be used for. And actually, the challenges between when you have a fund, do you use it to fund a project and ensure that you can keep a service running, or do you use it to fund your core work and actually ensure you can keep the charity running? And that's a real challenge. And I'm going to try very, very hard not to just have a pop at the Scottish Government colleagues, because actually, recognising what the Minister was saying earlier, there's been a lot of funding through the 7 years of this fund coming to the sector. And actually, it's really important that we recognise that and we celebrate that. And actually, we celebrate that this is one of the funds that can support core funding. and how important that is, that you can actually, I don't know, fund my job. I'm quite grateful for that personally. Or fund the buildings that we need, or try and accommodate for some of the energy increases through the increases in the fund. So that's a real positive. But then also if we look at the wider funds and then maybe just reflect a little bit on COVID. But actually there were so many funds who released some of the restrictions, let's say. You could adapt your funding to match the services that needed to be provided during COVID. There were removals of barriers in terms of how we report, what we report on, the targets that we maybe set ourselves. Always trying to figure out the indicators and outcomes. And there were some real positives about that. And actually there still are funders out there who are interested in supporting that core funding, which just keeps the backbone of the charity running. Which is so important to enable all of the amazing work that's just been talked about to go ahead from a project basis. And I suppose it's a little bit of a plea in terms of thinking to the future, actually the impact it has on every aspect of a charity when grants are delayed in terms of announcements. Because we have, I'm fortunate, I have enough reserves that I've not had to put any staff at risk this time. But actually not having the grant guaranteed means that we don't know if we can still have our staff. That we, in fact it was talked about earlier, that the importance of that multi-year funding to support the future and the planning of an organisation. It's, I suppose it's all, forgetting my words here, I should have brought my notes. It just gives that surety and that the ability to plan ahead, particularly when you're smaller charities. We were touching on earlier with the mental health funds and how many different pots that you'd have to apply for if you're a national charity, and the amount of work and effort that takes. And that's a one-year fund. So actually having a multi-year fund makes a significant difference because you can plan ahead and you know what's coming, and actually you can manage and schedule your applications. But I was going to say, I'm sure there will be lots of comments and questions on funding because it's always a thorny topic. And it's great that we have the national funds that can support and recognise the good work that we're doing and underpin the future of the sector. But it's also making sure that that funding does stay there and it grows with the needs of the sector as well.
Thank you very much, Mhairi. Thank you. And we will now open up to the floor. I think we want to spend as much time as we can. Questions from yourselves, observations or thoughts you may have. You may want to challenge the panel. We don't speak on behalf of the government about core funding, but you may have some thoughts on that. We can absorb all of that. So there are going to be one or two roving mics around, and I've got a colleague in the front who wants to kick things off here first of all. So a mic over here first of all. Thanks.
Iain Maxwell from Shared Parenting Scotland. Following on from mention of funding, I wanted to mention open and trusting. This is something that I've been involved with recently. It's a procedure or a guidelines developed by the Institute of Voluntary Action Research, both for funding applications but also for reporting back and sort of ongoing involvement between funders and the organisations that they are supporting. These guidelines are trying to produce something that is fair and accurate in terms of assessing, making decisions on funding, but not overdoing it. And I'm afraid that CORA is one of the culprits in this, that the application processes that you have used within this fund are far too laborious. They're over, and things like having a two-stage application process where you ask the key questions first of all to sort out who falls within your funding guidelines, and then ask further questions that are relevant once you've made decisions about whether people are going to be funded. The Institute organised a whole series of dialogues between charities and organisations giving funding, and I took part in some of these. And they were really useful discussions, because it wasn't a case of confronting a funder and saying, why are you doing this? It was more the charity talking to the funder, finding out what the problems they were having in assessing grants, in administering things. For instance, I had some very interesting discussions with one of the very old established, I think it was the Haberdashers Foundation in London, who've been going for hundreds of years. And they were discussing about how it was difficult when the trustees who were controlling the fund maybe came from a different generation and a different background from what's happening now. And therefore it was quite difficult to get them to undertake a more flexible process. But I would suggest anyone, including the civil servants and the CORA people here, look at open and trusting. I know CORA has signed up for it, but I think you need to do more than sign up for it. Because I don't want to be spending a large proportion of my time writing funding applications and writing reports to funders when I could actually be doing good work with that time. I don't mind spending some time doing it, but not excessive amount.
Thank you, Ian. I think we've got the gist of your question there. Thank you very much. Before I ask maybe Tejesh to kick off a response, is there anyone else in the room? And my experience working with CORA is actually quite different to that. I used to find CORA a much more user-friendly approach. I mean, it'd be interesting just to hear how others feel about that. There's a colleague there, can't quite see who it is, just in the middle of the room. Could come in with that, and then Tejesh could give us a response.
Yeah, thanks very much. Mhairi Toolbury from Up to Us. I did actually want to say in this themed discussion to thank CORA, because I actually do believe CORA has been incredibly flexible throughout this and tried to help us out by requiring less, meeting in person, facilitating help so that we could cope with the operational pressures on us during COVID. So I did want to say that, yes, all funding applications are onerous and take enormous resources from the third sector, because you've got more applications than funding available in every fund. We have to have a way of deciding. But the point I wanted to actually make was about the celebrating. And I really do appreciate our colleague talking about that, because we have been so busy surviving. I really did appreciate the bonus that the government gave our staff in recognition of them on keeping going during COVID. But one of the things we found difficult in the third sector, working at the highest end of vulnerability and risk, and being often the only service supporting kids through COVID, when some of our colleagues in the statutory sector had to withdraw and work from home and couldn't see, and going out on the doorstep every day and, you know, clapping and applauding our NHS colleagues, and then being awarded discounts in the supermarkets, they're awarded discount gym membership. I would really like to appeal to national funders and the government to create a campaign that celebrates. I know that the care sector received a wee bit of promotion from COVID because we did keep going, but the third sector in general, and recognising the work nationally that's done, my staff would really appreciate that and like to see a national recognition, with a national campaign. And only the national funders and the government could do it. Us voluntary organisations don't have the capacity even to get together and create that. But that was my thought on celebrating. I really do believe people should be positively reinforced for how we stayed alive and those really vulnerable people got services throughout, like remaining connected. Yeah?
Mhairi, thanks so much for that level of positivity. And we were a bit nervous when we were having the planning discussions about this, about pushing forward on that celebratory theme at a time of difficulty, crisis, and all of that. But I'm really encouraged by your experience of COVA, slightly different to Iain's experience. I'm going to do something I wasn't planning to do, but it might encourage, or otherwise, our colleagues at CORA. I'm just going to show a bit of audience participation. A show of hands if you have found the working with CORA colleagues a supportive process during COVID in particular, but even over the last 7 years. So a really good overwhelming number. Is there anyone, any hands that would say otherwise? So I think that's maybe a bit of an endorsement. That's been my experience of working with colleagues at CORA. I found them supportive, enabling, quite pragmatic, particularly during the time of COVID. But Tejesh would like to maybe address some of the question we had about core funding.
Yeah, I think just briefly, and for me it's not necessarily about a specific funder, but it's about that relationship with a funder. And you talked about the discussion. For me, it's that conversation is what's important. We don't want to lose that conversation and that feeling. We're working in collaboration, we're working in partnership with funders. We have shared goals that we want to achieve and outcomes that we want to support and drive alongside those funders. So for me, making sure that we can carry forward that idea of a conversation and understanding and being able to collectively move in that direction is very healthy for the way that we work, the way that we are as a sector, and the way that we can hold each other to account, both as government, as funders, as delivery partners within that relationship.
Sorry.
And can I just add to that?
Sorry.
I think one of my observations over the last 7 years is a definite shift in how funders across the board are operating, and that sort of open, relational approach that they're taking. We've got some brilliant relationships with funders who are providing core support as well as supporting projects, but actually it's about the relationship, it's about the dialogue. They're not necessarily looking for screeds and screeds of reports. Actually, there's one funder that just says, send us your annual report. We don't. That's all we need, and we'll have a conversation, and we can get the kind of specifics from the conversation that we have. So I think there's a definite shift from some funders about how they want to work with organisations, which is really fantastic, and we're always grateful for the support that we've got.
Yep, I'm definitely seeing that shift as well in a number of funders that I've been working with in a voluntary capacity in the last year, who are much more willing to work with organisations that are recognising the need for core funding, the need to provide the funding that supports leadership teams and so on. So yeah, thanks for that question. Now I've got a question from Emma, and I think a colleague in the front row as well.
Thanks for that. Emma Whitelaw, Lead Scotland. I'm the Chief Exec, and I came into post and a month later wrote the application for what would then be 7 years. And I guess my observation is, today it is a 7-year journey. I didn't know it was going to be. What would I have done differently? So it's making me thoughtful about it. I recommended that the board did a 3-year strategic plan to align with the 3 years, for example. If we'd known it'd be 7 years, maybe it'd be a 5-year plan, maybe we'd do things differently. So yes, I found CORA supportive, but really I'm just thinking, wouldn't it be great if they said, you've now got 5 years, what would we do differently with that? So yes, it's been 7 years, and I didn't know it was going to be.
Thank you for that observation, Emma. And a colleague from Crossreach just in the front table.
Thank you.
If any other hands could go up as well at the same time, colleague there and over here.
I'm Sheila Gordon from Crossreach, and actually it follows on very nicely from what you said there, because it is time now, I think, for us to think about that permanence of funding for the third sector. And the Minister said earlier about spending of 1.8 billion that comes via Scottish Government and public sector to the third sector. That's about 1% in my understanding of the total amount spent in public sector. 1% to the third sector. It sounds like a lot, but it's 1%. I bet you the population that we reach is not 1%. So is it not time now that we need to come together somehow and understand the value, the return on social capital that the third sector provide? We write the reports, we report on outcomes. Do the public sector do that? Not to the same degree, I would argue, that we do. So for the return on the money, I think the Scottish Government get a really good deal from us. And I think we lack that kind of ability to come together, don't we, as a group, to say this needs to change. We need that longer term funding. We need to be able to put in strategies behind how we want the third sector to develop in Scotland. So I think it's time now. And the other question for Cora was, have they been able to get any information on that the social capital return from the spend? I know you've got lots of information about outcomes. Could that be built into at least the next 2 years to understand? Now, I've heard studies before that say a 1 in 8 return approximately on spending in the third sector, but could we try and identify that as well?
Thank you very much, Rhona. I'm sure there'll be no one, thank you. Lots of warm response to that. I'm sure there'll be no one will disagree with that on the panel. Perhaps Carolyn may have something to say later on this afternoon about that specific question about that return for social capital and how unfair it is, the demands on the voluntary sector, which doesn't seem to translate into the demands of the public sector at times. So I think we would all agree with that. I'm keen to hear any questions or observations about some of the things we've said about volunteering in the sector or about rights in the sector, about users' engagement and the voice. We've got a couple of colleagues here. If you have a question on that, that'd be great. We can spend the last 5 minutes on funding and the challenges therein. But if there are any other broadening out the discussion, that'd be super to hear. But colleague here in the front, first of all. That's allowed.
Well, it's on funding, so
that's allowed.
Just a quick thank you to the speakers and all the guests who have spoken about the topic, and I'm finding it really reassuring. I particularly like the idea, the conversation around celebrating. We never do that enough, and that pressure that we feel in ourselves and constantly pushing. So that's kind of reassuring. Thank you. I suppose I wanted to just very quickly touch on funding, and it's always a hot topic, no matter what, every year. And I feel like the Scottish Government are doing a grand job, but at the same time, their strings are being pulled in every direction as well. So it's difficult for them to fork out the money every time for us, especially when we don't, as highlighted, have a union, or we don't have an organisation or one voice to push for our, support. So that might put us in a back foot a wee bit. So point I'm trying to make here is, I think as an as a sector, we maybe need to start thinking a little bit outside the box. And that not always relying on the government for funding or on funders for funding. You touched on about sort of self-income generation and generating our own income. I recognise not every organisation, not every service is able to do that. Sometimes, for instance, myself, Mellow Parenting, any organisation that we partner with, we train them so we could generate income through there. But the reality of the fact is that their income, they're going to be paying us through funding. So ultimately, it's the same pocket of money that's coming from a different source. So it's about thinking about how can we expand beyond that. And one of the things that I think we really can do, because we've got some fantastic businesses out there in Scotland prepared to support initiatives in the community. And we should, as a sector, start thinking about corporate social responsibility and really campaigning and pushing ourselves forward in that area. That's certainly something that I'm planning on hoping to do. And I'm delighted to see one of the workshops there, so I'll be in the front seat there. So I'm hoping to learn something from there today. But it's just about not always expecting the government, I suppose, to be able to bail us out. We need to be able to do that ourselves a wee bit as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think it's a really valid and a really vital point about charities in Scotland, how we can diversify our income generation. And I'm sure there's no one in the room who is not embracing and addressing that. We do need core funding. We do need that lift to keep us going in the work that we do. But you're touching on a point there. I'm sure will be explored, and I'm sure there'll be more people wanting to join the corporate partnerships workshop after lunch. So that might be a popular one. How can we engage the private sector much more, the business sector? They might not have the same level of funding to give in corporate partnerships as the ones did to charities in Scotland, but they're still there and still willing to be supportive. And I think it's about relationships. It's about building relationships, first of all, rather than going and saying, we need money. Can you give us some, please? But great points. There's one more comment here, and I might have to bring this part to an end, I'm afraid.
Hi there, thanks very much. Scott Christie from Working Right. Big thanks to the panel, really interesting discussion, and I've got a question directly to the panel. It's a positive one, maybe just a tiny wee bit of jeopardy at the end. I wanted to ask the panel what they think about how the sector created a space to innovate during the pandemic, and maybe even challenge a few systems as well during that time, and whether there's a potential that some of that innovation might be at risk at the minute. So yeah, just wondering what the panel think about that.
Okay, thanks. That's a great question, Scott, and I think I'm just going to hijack it because I was going to ask the panel members one by one their final thought about what they've heard and maybe something aspirational about the way forward. And I'm going to continue with that. But in addition to that, if each member can just very briefly, maybe a minute each, just address your question about how innovative has the sector been and how wonderful, isn't it, in that innovation? Who would have thought, that, just in my part of the sector, youth work organisations became food providers for many families, vulnerable families across the country, thanks in large part to the Winter Fund from the government. So, it was amazing to watch that and to be a small part of that. So it's a great question, and I'm going to just ask colleagues in turn to respond directly. And are we at risk of losing some of that that's been gained over the last 2 or 3 years?
I think we are at risk, absolutely. I think, there was some brilliant work that evolved through that agility and ability that we have to respond to the set of circumstances that we were in. And I saw that within my own team, as I said before, but also the kind of the collaborations and partnerships that we were able to nurture with other third sector organisations to approach how we are engaging with babies and toddlers and young children and their parents and carers in different ways. And we've tried to hold on to some of that practice. We do a lot of work outdoors, and we've continued to do a lot of work outdoors, and it's really worked for the families as much as it's worked for us through COVID and beyond. But I think the challenge that we've got is that it's this, we're creeping back to what was normal pre-COVID. And I kept saying to myself and to the team through the kind of pandemic, we need to hold on to the learning that we're getting from this experience, because we shouldn't just be reverting, because we were always talking about the things that we should be doing differently pre-COVID. And here was an opportunity to try and test and do things differently, because in some respects, it was, anything goes within the restrictions and parameters and guidance that were there. So, I think there is a danger that we're just creeping back because there's such demand for the work that we're doing. We're at full capacity, if not working beyond capacity. We've got staff who are shattered, and families who are still in desperate need of support. So it's a really fine balance, I think, in terms of trying to find that. So, I think it's a really fascinating area for discussion. I'm excited about where we can go, I suppose, and how we continue with the partnerships and collaborations that we've developed over the last 7 years, but actually in particular over the last sort of 3 or 4 years. And I think it's testament to the sector that we're in that those relationships are there.
Thanks, Rhona, and thanks for the question. And Tejesh, your thoughts and observations on that question?
Yeah, my reflections overall, I think that we're clearly can see here that the sector is vital. We are not superfluous, and the services we provide are completely necessary, and we demonstrated that through the pandemic. So we don't want, and we need that to not be forgotten. That for me, there's the thing I picked up through the conversation is there's a direct link to thinking about the future, and my aspiration is that we can attract people, talent to the sector moving forwards. We don't want to be in that position where people are saying, the security, sustainability, the salaries, and the opportunities are not there. We need to be sat here in 7 years' time, attracting new people into the sector and supporting those people as part of their well-being is a key part of that. In terms of your question, something that we'd benefited from at Venture Trust was actually support for volunteers, but in more of a pro bono sense from professionals within the private sector to support us to think about that innovation in terms of digitalising some of the kind of foundational infrastructure and so on. All the obvious things that as a sector we really struggle to invest in, to reflect on, to take the time to bring forwards, because we generally can't afford them and don't have the experts in IT, digital, etc. So that's something I think we need to be aware of. That some funders directly support that, but pro bono support could be something that can really help the infrastructure within our organisations.
Thank you, Tejesh. Jo, would you like to add anything to that?
Just a wee bit. I mean, I think because everything stopped and we had all this adrenaline, we achieved loads of things, and we're running out of adrenaline and we can't carry on doing new things just because we have to. So I think for me, it's about looking after people. It's about nurturing the staff we've got, trying to retain them, trying to develop people's skills. It takes a long time to be skilled at some of the stuff that we do. We're working with some really vulnerable people that need expertise, not just somebody that can do it once a week. So I think, looking after people, and yes, having a union, having a louder collective voice would be fantastic. So that's two things that I'm taking away.
Thank you, Jo. Thanks for that. Lara?
Thanks. It's a funny one, just kind of reflecting especially on what's been said there. I think I mentioned in my part about there's almost been an enhancement to the work that we'd done, which had always been quite remote in general, that's now kind of become normalised, which has been fantastic. And I don't really see us personally as an organisation changing too much, but that's very much from my point of view. I appreciate when you're working much more outdoors and things like that, that's just not possible. But when it comes to certain parts of what's happening, there are parts that I would like to return, which may be a little bit controversial, but there are just parts of personally the work that we do at Birthlink that is helpful to kind of have people on the ground and things like that. But that's a very, very personal take. But I think what kind of thinking in general about what's been said, I am feeling positive, and sometimes I come across too much of an optimist, but I do feel positive that, that voices are being heard, that, we are supporting but also advocating for, our service users. And I really do hope that gets to continue within the third sector, but also comes across on that statutory level as well. And I think continuing to have these conversations will hopefully lead to that.
I do like optimists. I'm an optimist. That's how we survive in our sector, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for that observation, Lara. And Dinah, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think for us, the pandemic kind of flicked a switch. Overnight, we went from being an office-based organisation. We were quite rule-bound. There was a lot of, checking that people were putting in their hours and that kind of thing. And overnight, we went to work from home. That's fine. The trust was just completely enhanced, and that has continued, and long may that continue. But there, and our staff would very much like to continue working from home. Hybrid working has allowed us to recruit people from further afield across the country. It's opened up possibilities there. So I think that's been incredibly positive for us. But it does come with a challenge as well. Always there's a challenge in these things, and that is, how do you maintain people's well-being at a distance? How do you make sure, actually, not that people aren't doing their hours because they're away shopping or doing the washing or walking the dog or whatever, but actually that they put some boundaries around their work time and they're not working constantly because they're working from home. And how do you keep people feeling included and supported at a distance? So definite benefits for us, which I hope do continue, but also some challenges in there as well.
Thank you, Dinah. So important, isn't it, about recognising the well-being of our colleagues, both staff and volunteers in the sector. So thank you for that. Last word to Mhairi. You're not allowed to mention funding. You've said enough about funding. So anything else, give us your thoughts.
I don't know how to follow all of that. That's my first thought. If I think about innovation, I was just going to talk about that. This sector is phenomenal because what we do is we work with people who tell us exactly what they need. Sometimes they do it directly. Sometimes we'll see it in the media. We see challenge because we're working with people with so many needs. And actually, I think that makes us really innovative because we identify it and we respond to it. And if I look at, let's say, the last three years, we've turned services round, we've switched everything up, we've come together, and for me that's a huge positive. Yes, it's at risk, and I'm not going to talk about funding, but actually there's the fatigue, there's the other challenges. Actually, we've moved from one crisis into the next. So yes, there is a risk there, but there's also a huge opportunity because we know how to do this. We know how to look at those needs and how to respond to them. So something I'm taking away from this is, I suppose, is that positive that when we come together as a sector, we can do better than that 1 in 8 response. And actually, we can find ways as individuals and as a whole collection of charities supporting children, young people and adults right across Scotland to make sure that we are there and we are relevant and we are providing what they need for the future.
A great point to finish on, Larry. Thank you so much. I'm really sorry. I know there was a few hands still going up for more questions, more comments. I'd love to have kept the conversation going, but I'm getting from the front of the conference to say it's nearly lunchtime, so I'm going to have to wind up at this point. But I know my colleagues here are keen to get out of the spotlight and back in amongst well-kent faces and friendly people around them. So can I just thank you for your questions and your comments? Can I thank you for your positive words to my colleagues, the panellists? It's been really encouraging. We were all a bit nervous, and I think the feedback that I've been picking up has been so helpful and so supportive. And in turn, can I, on your behalf, thank all of the panellists, my 6 colleagues, who have given up a fair amount of time in the last few weeks preparing for today. I hope it worked as well as I think it's worked, but I'm being biased. And so can I, on your behalf, thank my colleagues as they leave the stage away from this spotlight. Thank you very much.